Hello again. Thank you for your introduction, Margarida. Also, thank you to your team, Tiago, etc. All these people that trying to make their best for everything to go as it's supposed to. I'm very honored to be among this this group of people. Many of them are also friends. I also want to say hello to a common friend, Leonor Veiga, and she's a wonderful Portuguese curator. She first introduced me to Babel, this platform from where you do all this incredible work from Macau. That this surprised me a lot, and so this explains how the enthusiasm of my part to be in this debate today. What I'm going to try to do today is to unveil an aspect of my work that approaches the archive, but the archive as a very ephemeral and very unstable access point to the so-called historical truth. So initially, this notion of incompleteness of the archive appeared as a side aspect in my work, a very circumstantial thing, like a condition with which one has to deal with while doing the research. But slowly it became really very central, and I assumed this for the first time, as you mentioned before, in a work about the Mozambique Institute, especially in a video called Effects of Wording that I did in 2014, apropos of this school, the first anti-colonial school built by the Mozambique Liberation Front while in exile in Tanzania. So this was in the mid-60s. So this film, that it's like a film essay, shows different archives in the world telling the story, telling the relation to this school, to what it meant, and according to different visions of the world, the school appears in different ways, and this somehow unveils this complexity and problematic of the Cold War, and how it actually had a huge impact in early ideology of Frelimo. So we were supposed to see a frame from this video called Effects of Wording. So at the time, I called this kind of metadata of the archive the involuntary memory of the archives. Today, the title of my contribution here also tries to resume more or less the same idea. I call it the archival doubt. I also felt a little bit compelled in incorporating the word object in the title, mainly because of the so explicit topic of this conference. But in the other hand, I try to distance myself a little bit from the object. Obviously, it's not because it doesn't matter, it matters. It's just like I choose this position where my interest is more around the object. It's more than beyond. It's something that it's produced around, like the perception of the object. I had a long time ago a professor that really was very clear with an image. He talked about a donut-shaped diagram. Everyone knows how a donut goes. No, there's a hole in the center, and this professor of mine, Jorge Blasco, he would put the object in this void. And saying what is interesting, what the matter of our interest must be, is everything that is produced around it, these layers, successive layers of density, are different forms of technology, of photography, forms of authority, forms of possession of the object. Examples of these forms of possession could be, for example, the inventory. All these constituting forms of kind of capitalism, of violence too. And the particularly interesting thing about this image of this donut-shaped diagram is when you then put on this conversation, the table of discussion around restitution, because suddenly it clarifies a lot about what is missed in this discussion. And when you talk about reparation, you can actually have a sense of how much we're talking about when we pretend to proceed in repairing. In 2020, in January 2020, just before COVID entered our lives, an exhibition was inaugurated in Lisbon at the Galeria Avenida da Índia, an avenue with a very colonial name in Lisbon. And this exhibition brought together a significant part of my artistic work linked to Mozambique and the Mozambique archives. With the word portmanteau rumor, which I chose as the title, the exhibition showed a specific way of inventorying the 26 pieces that comprise the display. This approach to my work over a decade was the result of a reflection on the challenges that I faced working with archives that had several and different forms of incompleteness. The exhibition urged one to reimagine archives through the forms of absence, like deferred strategies, temporary restrictions, public secrets, such as rumor or humor, as unsuspected proof of a clairvoyance of a reality that can't be inscribed officially. Using a device that I called mirror wall, the exhibition established as a central piece a composition made from blow-ups of photographs depicting the first collection of Maconde art in the Nampula Ethnographic Museum that is a colonial legacy left by the Portuguese in the north of Mozambique. In March 2018, I visit this museum, this National Museum of Ethnology, and I met the director at the time. It was called Mr. Kuliumba, and also I met the team that works with him. And I had with me at the time 5 black and white photographs that I brought from a private archive in Lisbon. I showed them these photographs on my mobile phone. They were not familiar with these images. However, they had been taken 60 years ago at exactly the same place where we were standing. In one of the photographs, is the one that is shown now, I helped identify the first 2 curators of the museum when it was inaugurated in the year of 1956 under a military name, Commander Eugênio Ferreira de Almeida Regional Museum, it was called. In the image, The two curators had been photographed with their wives and the daughter of one of the couples, standing in the very curious poses, camouflage among sets of life-size wooden human figures exhibiting ethnic scarifications. It's not very clear what in this picture is shown as culture and what is shown as at service of an ethnographic display. Like the Maputo masks are mounted on these sorts of structures, and there are other artifacts associated with initiation rites that are in display. So at my request, slowly, one of the museum staff, Antonio Timbanga, I remember, he went through the museum and brought from several different places the items he was recognizing from this photo. And he gathered a small set of objects, setting them out before me so I could photograph them again. So in this kind of performance, I recognize the activation protocol based on a photograph as being part of an ecosystem of a European museum, for example, that is organized around his collection. The photo was served as an inventory. It had an inventory value. But unfortunately or not, this access system, which organized and reports documents in relation to each other, does not seem to exist in the same matter throughout the world. The colonial archive of this museum in Nampula does not exist there. From the early years of its activity, even still in colonial area, there was a lack of resources to maintain that museum, and it gradually was abandoned. With the decolonization process in 1974 and 75, a part of the collection was taken by the colonizers. And I also knew after a while that the archive was actually put aside previously to these dates and sent simply to Lisbon way before the revolution and the starting of the war. So the colons returned in mass to Portugal and other regions in the world with whatever they could carry in their baggage. So I was not wrong in presupposing that these photographies will not be recognized by the current staff of the Nampula Museum. And I also easily accepted the idea that the corrupted link between the museum collection and its archive was the result of the violent rupture between Portugal and its colonial space. But there was another stigma associated with this perturbation of historical nature. It is easier to abjure an object when it cannot assume the appearance of a memory for lack of evidence of its representation by omitting vestiges of its material and symbolic permanence. I'm sorry for this delay. So the Maconde collection of the Nampula Museum reflected the result of an administrative acquisition of objects from villages in Cabo Delgado, as well as pieces provided by staff and colonial administrators in the region. Responding to a circular appealing for contribution, staff and administrators made personal donations to the museum collection. In the collection of ebony Maconde sculptures, many would have been bought to decorate their homes, such as in the figure of the Macondized saint in the photograph card you can see now. So this photograph shows a wooden female figure that was captured Maconde sculpture. It is part of the photo collection brought by the team of Portuguese and German anthropologists Margot Dias and Jorge Dias. This collection belongs to the National Museum of Ethnology in Lisbon. On one hand, the image reflects this private space of a residence with these European curtains. It also shows a totally different type of intimate aspect, the intimacy between the team of anthropologists and the Portuguese colonial administration. Close ties with the administration were essential to be able to carry out the fieldwork. Jorge Dias, in his unpublished reports, criticized the brutal and uncultured way the Portuguese administration treated the indigenous population, and more emotional than her husband, Margot Dias also did not hide her irritation with how European cultural practices tended to distort the population traditional culture. The instrumentalization of the population by the Catholic religion, for example, will have given rise to commissioning the production of ebony sculptures such as the one in the photograph. As for the exterior of the museum, a composite architecture similarly mirrored the spectrum of the colonial script. Opposition and resistance to the colonial system are absent. This resistance would be controlled by co-opting assimilated individuals into white civilization. However, it was necessary to imagine the members of the pre-assimilated culture, since this was being modified by the supposedly superior European culture. In the light of evidence of change, the fiction of tradition was supported by museographic and scientific tools. The dissociation between the body and object took root. The product of the Maconde sculpture was catalogued and studied inside the museum's building, while in the square behind the museum, the workers of this local culture were made to correspond to an ethnographic context that was suitable for their cultural circle. So the image in color we are looking at was taken in 1986, so many years after independence, by a GDR worker that was a teacher in Nampula at that time. He sent me this photo. It's one of the few, it was the only photo I could find from the back facade of the museum. Although today you can see that this relation between the building that has the objects and the back square where the sculpture work under these very rural structures is still at play. Sorry for this delay. I'm a little bit lost here in my notes. So the Portuguese anthropologists Margot and Jorge Dias visited the Nampula Museum in 1958 with a mixture of interest and disquiet. In 1961, with a view to compiling material for the 5th volume of the Maconde of Mozambique, they commissioned a professional photographic inventory from the Mozambique Institute of Scientific Research in Lourenço Marques. The request concerned surveying collections of Maconde art in Mozambique museums, resulting in 4 boxes of photographs, where 225 photographs corresponded to the collection of the Nampula Museum and 37 corresponded to the ethnographic session of the Museum of Natural History in Lawrence Marques. Nowadays, these 4 boxes of photographs are in the Museum of Ethnology in Leipzig, in Germany. In the early 2018, the relations between Mozambique and the former GDR inspired my artistic residence at Grassi Museum of Ethnology in Leipzig. I was wondering, how could one translate the historical materialism in the narrative of the ethnographic museum with colonial collections? In 1977, Gisler Blessa, the curator responsible for the East African and South Africa collection at the Leipzig Museum, prepared his first exhibition bringing together contemporary art from Mozambique and Maconde objects from the museum's colonial collection. Mozambique, Kunst und Handwerk einer Jugend Volksrepublik, Mozambique, Art and Crafts of the Young People's Republic was the title of this exhibition. When I interviewed him for my exhibition in Lisbon, it was 2020, Blessa affirmed that the theoretical justification for the exhibitions was a key question to be resolved. One operated within the notion of base and superstructure, using adaptation of the German cultural circle theory. Within this theoretical alignment, the exhibitions narrated the culture of ways of life, interrelating religion and society. At the Leipzig Museum, I found a reference for the 4 boxes with the photographs of the Maconde art of Mozambique. The black and white photographs showed a sequence of Maconde art figures, brilliantly caricaturing the white Portuguese colonizers. In addition to the caricature, other pieces were faithful ebony wood representations of figures from Portuguese history and literature, such as the dictator Salazar and Luís Vaz de Camões. Yet others showed Maconde figures incorporating signs, gestures, and attire from the colonizing culture. In 1991, after the political transformation of Germany, Blessa came to Lisbon and met Margot Dias, with whom he had corresponded for years. While preparing the 5th volume, Margot Dias had asked the Leipzig Museum for information on the Maconde masks and sculptures in the collection of the German anthropologist Karl Voil. This collection resulted from his expedition to southern Tanzania in 1906, when this region was still a German protectorate. As for the 4 boxes with photographs of Maconde sculptures from Mozambique, they were of little use for Margot Dias, since they could not be attributed to the traditional art, nor to the so-called modern Maconde art. But Blessa was interested in precisely this phase of the transformation of Maconde art linked to religious and social phenomena towards a so-called modern art, even if disconnected from these representations. The projects for the 5th volume would not include these photographs, but also it didn't see light until today. So these photographs were not applied, even if it was Blesa pursuing this project. The boxes were given to him, and in his turn, Blesa donated them to the Leipzig Museum. Generally considered to be commissioned art, the disconcerting critical expression of some of these pieces, the sarcasm and the humor, create a resistance to the strict cataloging with regards to this collection. The Maconde of the Nampula Museum could have been challenging the colonialism from the heart of their power apparatus, the museum. So this image is from another project it's an image we used for the diffusion of an event that happened in 2019 in Mozambique. And this event was the first event on the thematics of restitution. The struggle for memory in Mozambique has been at the core of our concerns and has been an ongoing conversation. And in that sense, the debate around restitution, it's not at all something new. Knowing the knowledge of colonialism as a memory of oppression, it's not the same as having support in interpreting its models of propaganda. A deep knowledge of Portuguese colonialism will open the eyes to its continuities. Until there, until there is no access to documents and objects, the official version of history will prevail. In May 2019, the first seminar on restitution took place in Maputo at the CCFM, which is the Mozambique and French Central Cultural Center. It was a one-day event organized by Oficina de História, which I also occasionally am a member. And in this first event, very preliminary, was meant to hear some artists, curators, writers, and intellectuals from Maputo on the issue that was already being raised at the level of other countries on the continent. It was also the opportunity to clarify concepts. So it had a very pedagogical point of view. At that time, we had the support of Luis Bernardo Wana, a famous Mozambican writer, a former Secretary of State for Culture and President Machel in the 80s. So he brought to light for us of some concepts elaborated at this time and some stories that were lost about the Maconde Art Restitution Project that was blocked by a mix of lack of preparation of the Portuguese museums, diplomatic issues, and also the presence of civil war in the country, and obviously accompanied by economic crisis. The UNESCO was reigniting the issue of restitution internationally, and the former ministry, Owana, felt very supported by international politics and debates. So this project strangely generated the exhibition in Paris called Art Maconde, Tradition et Modernité. Today, the situation in Mozambique and Portugal has not changed so much. The same elements are still unblocked, but we decided to develop furthermore this conversation into a program that happened last year in 2021, which included an international event with protagonists from the other countries in the continent and an exhibition of photography, colonial photography. So I will be happy to share with you a link to the content of this last event, maybe in this in the box, in the chat box. And I will stop here my presentation, and thank you all.